The Irishman is directed by Martin Scorsese and is one of his very best films. The story is about the murder of Jimmy Hoffa, who was president of the Teamsters, the powerful labor union for the trucking industry. He was murdered over the Teamsters pension fund, which lent money at low interest or no interest to organized crime. For instance, loans from the Teamsters built Las Vegas, according to the narrator, Frank Sheeran, a mob enforcer and hitman played by Robert DeNiro. He's the Irishman of the film's title. The story is based on the real-life Frank Sheeran's confessions in a book written about his life and his role in the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa. I Heard You Paint Houses is the name of the book. But beyond what the story is about, the film itself is a cautionary tale about the consequences of living an unexamined life. Now, this film is 3.5 hours and doesn't get going with the main story until about 45 minutes in, because the first 45 minutes shows us how a regular guy like Frank Sheeran descends into a life of organized crime. He's a contract killer who does what he does for money. That's his only motivation. Now, we don't get a lot of introspection from this character. He's not talkative, despite being the narrator. He narrates external events, but doesn't question the morality of his actions. This theme was explored by the director as well in a later film, Killers of the Flower Moon, where the baby-faced but villainous character played by Leonardo DiCaprio talks about how he loves money. He says that twice in the film, and we get nothing else about why his actions became so reprehensible. Now, both these films were nominated for Best Picture, and many of the scenes show seemingly humdrum discussions about despicable actions, including murder. They discuss murder as if it were just transactional. There's even comedy in these scenes. The killers aren't very smart, but they have lives, relationships, responsibilities, and there's music playing in the background. Now, to these folks, there's nothing unusual about what they're doing. They don't question it. Now, this film, The Irishman, also shows us how the lack of introspection becomes entrenched with the passage of time. Until the very end, of course. We're shown that Jimmy Hoffa's presidency of the Teamsters coincided with JFK's election as President of the United States and the appointment of Robert F. Kennedy as Attorney General. Now, RFK pursued Jimmy Hoffa with numerous legal cases, and when RFK was no longer Attorney General, one of those cases put Jimmy Hoffa in prison for jury tampering. He was later pardoned by Richard Nixon, and so Jimmy Hoffa was no angel, but there's a scene in prison where he brags about being convicted of fraud because that's different from extortion, which means he never threatened anyone. And throughout the film, we're shown scenes of Jimmy Hoffa's introspection. His first appearance in the movie is about 45 minutes in. He's on the phone and hires Frank Sheeran as a bodyguard. When they get off the phone, Frank's boss, Russell Buffalino, played by Joe Pesci, says, "He's talkative, isn't he?" And Frank says, "I thought I was talking to General Patton." Frank served in the military during World War II. He goes from the military into a trucking job where he joins the Teamsters. Arguably, Jimmy Hoffa is the main character in this film, with the stature of a Shakespearean tragic hero. Now, unlike any other character in the movie, he's extremely talkative, like Hamlet or Macbeth. Now, he refers to the Teamsters union as my union. He says that many times. So his motivations go beyond money. He talks about hating millionaires. That's why he hates the Kennedys. He views JFK and RFK as children of millionaires and therefore not to be trusted. The Buffalino crime organization is different. They helped elect JFK, according to the film. Now, Jimmy Hoffa and Russell Buffalino are both leaders in their domains. The film shows us how each leader imparts his own moral values to Frank, who's loyal to both men. As portrayed in the film, Jimmy Hoffa is individualistic. Although he leads the Teamsters union, which emphasizes brotherhood and solidarity, we see that his quest to reclaim the presidency of the Teamsters after being released from prison is really about his identity and sense of self. And it's not about money, because he has plenty of money. Now, ultimately, he tries to kick organized crime out of the Teamsters, and that brings his values into conflict with Russell, a murderer who doesn't get his own hands dirty. He has Frank for that. And so the film shows us how Russell distances himself from the bloody deeds, even in the dialogue and how he talks about murder. This guy should take a trip to Australia. Would you like to help him get down there? And that type of speech is designed to get around a wiretap, certainly, but the character is convicted for just this type of talk. Joe Pesci here is a sophisticated boss with a strong sense of self. Now, his conflict of values with Hoffa even seems like fate. The last 45 minutes or so of the film shows us the aftermath of Hoffa's murder. Every member of the Buffalino crime organization is convicted and sent to prison. The feds can't pin the murder on any individual, but the film isn't concerned with that necessarily. Their time in prison seems comfortable enough. They have each other for company. By this time, they're senior citizens, not in great health. The director shows us, one by one, each member of the crime organization dying through violence or natural causes or cancer. And we can't help but think about the next life and what will happen to these characters when they get there. Now, that's also where this film becomes Shakespearean, because in the soliloquies of Shakespeare, we learn that the characters are plagued with doubt about their actions in this life, and that murder is never a simple undertaking. We see that in Macbeth and Hamlet, for instance. Now, ultimately, our actions do catch up with us. Al Pacino gives a towering performance as Jimmy Hoffa. He imbues the character with the same idealism we saw in one of his career best performances, as Michael Corleone, whose idealism clashed with his pragmatism and humanity, creating a portrait of a tragic anti-hero in the Godfather films. As Jimmy Hoffa, Pacino shows us that the idealism was so intense it blinded him to the danger from his bodyguard and friend, Frank Sheeran. Here, Robert De Niro, as Frank, portrays the man who murdered Jimmy Hoffa. He's a loyal soldier with no moral doubts until the end of his life, when he's choosing a casket, a resting place. Then he enters a nursing home where he meets regularly with a priest. Now, we get just a glimmer of regret in the final scene with the priest, but Frank remains alive at the end of the film, and we can't help but think that Russell Buffalino was right. He realized that Frank valued security above all. It seems appropriate that Frank is the last man standing, or rather, sitting in a wheelchair at the end of this film. Robert De Niro's performance here seems unlike his previous roles, where his intelligence was always so striking. But could Frank Sheeran really have been so dense, given that he's alive while all of his friends are dead? And his priest assures him that God can still forgive him. So this film is a morality tale, but Frank's story doesn't seem to be over yet. Now, credit De Niro for making Frank's journey consequential as the little guy who survives to the end, while the presumed better men that he served are all dead. And now that he's finally free of them, what will Frank do? The Irishman is one of Scorsese's best. Now, along with Killers of the Flower Moon, these films show a director with a rare gift who just keeps getting better. Now, beyond his mastery of the cinematic art form, Scorsese's portrayal of frail human beings renders harsh judgment but doesn't remain stuck there. Now, like the priest at the end of the film, Scorsese cracks the door open a bit for the audience, it seems. The story isn't over for Frank, nor for anyone. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, leave a like and don't forget to subscribe.